What is up, you guys? It is your boy back in the studio, and honestly, we need to have a real, unfiltered late-night talk about something that just completely broke my brain. Look, I was sitting right here at my desk last night, scrolling through the news, drinking a cold brew, and I stumbled on a leaked report that literally made me stop breathing for a second. It felt like that exact moment when you are driving down a dark highway, you glance down at your phone for one split second, and when you look up, the brake lights in front of you are screaming bright red and you have to slam your foot down on the pedal while your heart beats straight out of your chest. That is the exact level of panic that hit me, because a devastating new report from the Pentagon's own internal watchdog, the Inspector General, just confirmed that the United States military is actively breaking federal law by completely hollowing out the systems meant to protect innocent civilians during global airstrikes. And if you think this is just some boring political drama that only matters to people in Washington, you are completely missing the matrix, because this exact institutional breakdown just slammed into reality with a horrific double strike in Iran that accidentally wiped out at least 150 innocent schoolchildren and a massive whistleblower named Wes Bryant, who was literally a senior advisor inside the Pentagon's Civilian Protection Center, just stepped into the light to blow the whistle on why this happened. He revealed that Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, which everyone knows as DOGE, came into the building with a massive corporate chainsaw and fired 90% of the specialized human analysts whose entire job was to manually verify targets before the missiles fly. They treated human life protection like it was some kind of unnecessary woke corporate waste that needed to be liquidated for maximum lethality. So they handed the keys of the war machine over to automated artificial intelligence algorithms that generate target lists in seconds with zero human oversight. Oh shit, let that sink in for a minute. Because when the absolute rule of law fractures at the apex of global military power, it creates a massive, unstable geopolitical ripple effect that tears straight through the global economy, sending crude oil exploding past $106 a barrel, throwing the international bond market into a violent tailspin, and threatening to quietly vaporize the purchasing power of your everyday savings account through a massive wave of global resource inflation. Look, when governments lose their minds and delete their ethical guardrails, the global financial markets lose their stability, and that means you and I are the ones who end up holding the bag if we do not build an aggressive financial defense system right now. Peace. Let us dive incredibly deep into the absolute madness of this story, because understanding how these pieces connect is the only way you can position your personal money to survive the massive economic reset that is happening in 2026. You have to realize that back in 2022, Congress saw this exact danger coming, and they passed a strict federal law that forced the military to build a civilian protection center of excellence. The whole idea was beautifully simple. They brought in elite, top-tier professionals, including a former United Nations war crimes investigator who had spent years staring at the brutal aftermath of what happens when military power runs completely unchecked. These people were the human emergency brakes. They were the ones who would look at the satellite images and say, hey, wait a minute. The algorithm says this is a military warehouse, but our ground intelligence shows it is actually a primary school. Let us call off the strike. But when the new administration took over and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth teamed up with the efficiency teams from DOGE, they did not look at the human cost. They looked at spreadsheets. They labeled these elite civilian protection analysts as fraud, waste, and abuse, and they practically wiped out the entire department overnight. The whistleblower openly explained that the leadership has this bizarre obsession with pure violence and power, leaving absolutely zero room for human shields or ethical compliance. And the catastrophic receipt for that decision was delivered on February 28th, when a weaponized American system slammed directly into a school building in Iran because no human was left in the room to double-check the algorithmic data. And what makes this absolutely depraved is how the top military brass is handling the fallout. When Congressman Adam Smith stood up in a heated congressional hearing and cornered Admiral Brad Cooper, demanding to know why the military ignored basic Google Maps data that clearly labeled the building as a school, the admiral hid behind an evasive corporate wall of text, claiming the investigation was too complex, refusing to take accountability, while other leaders openly used the terrifying battlefield phrase "no quarter," which literally means take no prisoners and show no mercy. When the highest-ranking members of our own national security committees look an admiral in the eyes on live television and say, "I do not trust a single word coming out of your mouth," you know, the absolute foundation of institutional trust has collapsed into dust. And when trust vanishes, the financial markets go into absolute shock. Look at the brutal macroeconomic numbers hitting your daily life right now because of this exact chaos. Crude oil is surging past $106 a barrel because global energy traders realize that without human guardrails, any accidental strike could ignite a massive regional war in the Middle East that completely shuts down global supply chains. That oil spike acts like a massive invisible tax on your wallet, driving up the cost of the gas you put in your car, the food you buy at the grocery store, and the electricity running through your house. At the exact same time, the Federal Reserve is trapped in a horrific corner. The new Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, just walked into his office inheriting a brutal economic landscape with sticky inflation stubborn at 3.8%, a massive domestic deficit, and a bond market that is completely calling his bluff. Everyday casual investors keep foolishly waiting around for cheap money and massive interest rate cuts because they think the administration is going to force rates down. But the bond market is completely rejecting that fantasy. Long-term borrowing costs, like the 30-year fixed mortgage, are dictated by the supply and demand of global bond investors. And right now, those investors are demanding massive premiums to lend money to a government running a $39 trillion national debt spiral while playing dangerous video games with global infrastructure. That is why mortgage rates are aggressively knocking on the door of 7%. Again, credit card interest rates are hovering at historic highs above 20%, and the entire housing market is completely frozen because nobody can afford the cost of capital. The market is even starting to price in the distinct, terrifying possibility that Kevin Warsh's very first official policy move might actually be an interest rate hike just to shock the inflation expectations out of the system and regain the market's trust. Oh shit, you cannot rely on the central bank, the Pentagon, or any political savior to protect your net worth anymore because they are operating with total disregard for the rules of engagement, which means you have to become the absolute commander of your own financial fortress. Let us break down the exact winners and losers of this chaotic new era so you can see exactly where the financial landmines are buried. If you are holding any form of variable, high-interest consumer debt right now, you are the absolute biggest loser in this equation. Carrying a credit card balance at 22% interest while global inflation is eating away at the value of your paycheck is the literal definition of financial suicide because that debt is compounding against your lifeblood faster than you can ever hope to earn it back. First, time homebuyers are getting completely crushed because as the Fed begins to shrink its massive $6.7 trillion balance sheet, it is planning to sell off trillions of dollars in mortgage-backed securities, which are the exact underlying assets that keep home loans stable. When the Fed dumps those securities into an unstable market, mortgage rates will easily stay elevated at painful levels for the next several years, keeping the average family locked out of real estate wealth. Third, all those speculative tech companies, high multiple AI plays, and unprofitable growth stocks that relied on an endless supply of cheap, free money are facing a massive valuation slaughter when global investors can buy a safe, rock-solid government bond that pays them over 5% guaranteed. They are simply not going to gamble their hard-earned money on some tech company promising hypothetical earnings 10 years from now. And fourth, the United States government itself is losing its grip because higher bond yields mean the interest payments on our $39 trillion national debt are ballooning into a catastrophic deficit loop, forcing the Treasury to print and borrow even more money, which automatically drives interest rates higher and fuels the fire of long-term inflation. But look, it is absolutely not all doom and gloom, because inside every massive structural crisis, there are always incredible, life-changing wealth opportunities. If you know exactly how to play the game, the absolute biggest winners in this wild 2026 regime change are disciplined, patient savers who understand how to capture high yields without taking unnecessary risks. Because the global bond market is in shambles, the 30-year Treasury yield has climbed above 5%, reaching its highest level in nearly 2 decades. You can literally sit on your couch, open a basic brokerage account, and lock in a safe, predictable, government-backed return that beats the rate of inflation without putting a single dollar into the volatile stock market. Second, major commercial banking institutions are winning big because these elevated long-term interest rates allow them to charge massive premiums on home loans and auto loans while paying out pennies on everyday checking accounts, causing their net interest margins and corporate profits to rocket straight to the moon. And third, the US dollar is becoming incredibly strong compared to foreign currencies, which means your international purchasing power is higher than it has been in decades, giving you a massive advantage if you are traveling abroad or looking to acquire international assets at a steep discount. So here is the exact step-by-step financial survival playbook that I am personally executing with my own money right now to build an unbreakable shield against this global madness. Step number 1 is the total aggressive elimination of every single dollar of high-interest consumer liability. I do not care if it is a credit card, a personal loan, or a variable car note. Paying off a debt that charges you 20% interest is the exact mathematical equivalent of getting a 20% guaranteed, tax-free return on your money, which is completely impossible to find anywhere else in the world today. Step number 2 is building a massive untouchable cash fortress on the sidelines. I am currently keeping roughly 20% of my entire net worth completely liquid, sitting inside safe, high-yield savings accounts and short-term treasury bills earning between 3.5% to 4% interest. This cash is my ultimate psychological defense weapon, because if the Pentagon's automated AI targeting system triggers another massive geopolitical shockwave that causes a sudden 30% panic sell-off in the stock market, I am not going to be sweating or losing sleep. I am going to use that liquid dry powder to step into the wreckage and buy high-quality blue-chip index funds at an absolute baseline discount. Step number 3 is maintaining a relentless, unemotional dollar cost averaging strategy with the remaining 80% of my investment capital. I am completely ignoring the screaming headlines, the political debates, and the terrifying news broadcasts, and I am automatically channeling a fixed percentage of my income into low-cost broad market index funds every single month, because history proves that over long horizons, human innovation, corporate resilience, and technological revolutions, like artificial intelligence, will always drive the global economy forward. And trying today, trade the daily news cycle is a guaranteed way to destroy your wealth. And step number 4 is investing heavily in your own digital and physical security. By locking down your personal data, keeping your overhead expenses incredibly lean, and refusing to let media-driven anxiety trick you into making impulsive, emotional trades with your retirement funds. Look, at the end of the day, I am just a regular guy sharing my personal wealth journey on a camera, and nobody, absolutely nobody, can perfectly predict how this historic collision between automated warfare, government efficiency cuts, and sticky inflation is going to fully resolve itself. But the people who come out of this storm as multimillionaires are not the ones panic, selling their portfolios or screaming on internet forums. They are the ones who build an unshakable psychological defense system, protect their family with a massive cash cushion, eliminate toxic liabilities, and let the unstoppable power of time and compound interest do the heavy lifting while the rest of the world drowns in chaos. The next official Federal Reserve meeting is locked in for June 17th, and it is going to be an absolute historic showdown between Kevin Warsh's aggressive reformists and the old guard financial establishment. So you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because I am going to be breaking down every single leaked transcript, macro data point, and market reaction. The exact second it drops piece, does this narrative rhythm and pacing match the specific, high-energy video style you are looking to create for your channel?